Yo, what's up everybody? This is Junior Chicken here, bringing you an honest review of my favorite Bionicle sets, the Toa Inika. This Toa team was released in the summer wave of 2006. Each set costing $10 back then, which adjusted for inflation is about $15 today. Each set has 46 pieces, with the exceptions being Toa Nuparu with 54 pieces and Toa Hewkii with 62 pieces. Now, back in 2006 when these sets were released, Bionicle had kinda fallen out of favor for me. I lost interest during the Hordika arc, and while the marketing for these sets really caught my interest, they weren't quite what I envisioned them to be, so I gave them a pass. A few years later, I would realize how great these sets really were, but unfortunately could not experience them in their full glory. Now that my passion for Bionicle has been reignited and I am a financially stable adult, I finally have my favorite Toa team in my possession. So how about I review them to truly gauge how they measure up to my expectations. Of course, this will be fairly subjective. I will discuss other opinions of these sets, but mostly we'll focus on what I like and dislike about them. Starting with a general overview and then diving into the differences of each set. Don't expect me to fanboy over these like I did with my old Toa Inika review. With all that addressed, let's get to it. First, let's look at the articulation. This is one of the biggest pros for me. There are 13 points of articulation for each Toa. The neck, both shoulders, both elbows, both wrists, both hips, both knees, and both ankles. Articulation has gradually evolved, starting in 2013 when the Rockshi introduced knee articulation. The Toa Matoro added in elbow articulation, but took away shoulder articulation to incorporate the gear function. The Toa Hordika only had full articulation in one arm, and the Paraka almost got it right. They almost got it right because the right wrist only rotated on one axle to incorporate their dual action weapon, and the left elbow was awkward and unnatural due to the use of the Toa Matoro arm piece. The Toa Inika are the first canister sets to perfect the articulation, giving us the greatest number of points with natural rotation and movement. That's a con I will get to later. Yeah, as a result, it makes it great for posability. Let's get Jaller's face in there. Look at the camera. Nice. While some fans don't like the removal of gears, I personally felt that the gears always came at the expense of better articulation, so I felt it was fair to sacrifice them at this point in the Bionicle line. And thankfully, these sets do still come with functions that I will discuss later. Another big positive with these sets is that they introduced over a dozen new pieces. Not just the masks or the weapons that would be exclusive to the Inika, all the armor pieces, the leg pieces with the knee guards, and both feet variants would become standard molds for future Bionicle sets, really showing how the Inika created a stamp on its successors. Another pro would be the brighter color scheme, striking a good balance between the darker primary colors of the Matoro sets and the vibrant colors of the Mata sets. Some sets go beyond to give us translucent connector pieces or melded pieces. It's also nice to see a variety of metallic colors used throughout the sets rather than just silver as we would see with previous and future waves. Each of the Toa Inika sets come with a minimum of 2 weapons. The first being the battery-powered light-up primary weapon. Pressing a button produces a strobe light effect. This feature is exclusive to 2006 sets, with the Paraka having light-up eyes and Umbra reusing 2 of the Toa Inika weapons in his set. This in turn adds to the uniqueness of the Toa Inika, especially since they come in a variety of colors. The second weapon is the Zamor launcher, which counts as a set function. It's easy to shoot with and packs some decent power. While the Paraka also have this weapon, the Inika have a barrel attached to their weapon, allowing you to shoot 6 shots in succession. I also would like to note that the Zamor launcher is one of the few buildable launchers in the Bionicle line. It doesn't come in just one piece, and thus has a lot more charm in my opinion compared to other launchers. Those are all the things I like about the Toa Inika. Now it's time to get critical. I know plenty of Bionicle fans do not like the Inika build due to its lack of complexity. While I do agree that 3 large pieces being fastened together by pins is pretty simple, I wouldn't say that's bad. The Inika build is a pretty solid body in my opinion, because it looks complete, which I feel is most important. There's no big gaps or exposed connections. It looks pretty cohesive. Yes, the Inika build would be reused a lot later on in the Bionicle line and spoofed with varying degrees of success, but that doesn't make the build itself bad. The Inika build was a solid action figure build, and that's why Bionicle kept using it. Unfortunately, they couldn't innovate as much as fans would have wanted, and thus it became infamous for that. I would still say that this build is better than the backwards Paraka build that we would see on future sets. Now let's talk about my personal cons with these sets, starting with the head design. While the mask aesthetics are decent and it is cool that they are rubber this time around, the masks are not reverse or forwards compatible with other sets, so you're kind of stuck using this same head design for every mock where you have this mask used. The head design itself is also pretty bland. It's just a rounded lime piece with a bit of white melded on the front. It also kind of sucks that each set doesn't have a unique eye color. I understand why these design choices were made. I mean, the masks themselves are supposed to be more organic. The faces of the Toa Inika emit intense light when their mask is off, and 2006 was one of the years where eye color correlated with moral alignment. Still, I would have preferred if they kept reverse compatibility with the masks and unique eye colors for each of the Toa. The next gripe I have with these sets is with the weapons. For the primary weapon, it's not that it is battery powered, but how much force is needed to trigger the buttons sometimes. They can be very insensitive. I actually had to take 3 of the Toa Inika weapons apart, only to find that the button wasn't contacting the signal receiver enough. So that will be something you will need to check before you change the batteries. For the Zamor launcher, the problem is that the top sphere is not secure, and it will easily fall out, which is kind of a pain when you're trying to pose these guys unless you take that Zamor out completely. Now let's look at each of the Toa Inika sets and see what distinguishes them from each other, as well as look at the individual pros and cons of each set. Starting things off, we have Jaller, the captain, the one destined to be a hero. He protected Tokoro, aided in the discovery of the 7th Toa, and led the labor strike which would lead to his friends and him becoming Toa. He's one of the better sets of the bunch in my opinion. His color scheme is awesome, using Metru Red and Orange to match the fire motif. We haven't seen orange on a Toa of Fire since Tahunuva. In fact, Votorak is the only fire character since then to use orange pieces. Jaller does one better and gives us translucent orange. It looks really cool and greatly matches the fire and lava aesthetic. This is probably one of the best color schemes to grace a fire type. On top of that, his armor and weapons are a bright gold, which further complements his color scheme and makes him just look like a badass warrior. And no, it's not the dull gold that we have seen with Takanuva and Likan. This is a nice shiny gold, which I would much prefer over silver for a fire character. For distinguishable pieces, Jaller uses the Type 2 torso armor, has Toa Matoro legs for arms, and clawed feet. His primary weapon is the energized fire sword, which pays homage to Toa Tahu and has a pretty cool asymmetrical shape. However, the sword lights up green, which conflicts with his color scheme. The same can be said with his Zamorals, which are also green. And I feel like a red glowing sword and orange Zamors would have worked better. Jaller's mask is the Kanoe Calyx, the Mask of Fate, allowing him to perform physical feats at perfect coordination. It looks pretty cool despite the gaps on the side and the top of the mask. Overall, Toa Jaller is a pretty badass set, with his color scheme really matching the fire aesthetic and his sick weapon. Next up is Hahli, the Scholar. She became the Chronicler after uniting the island, and she's come to keep her friends united as a Toa. Hahli is one of the more unique sets in how much melding she has in her pieces. Her shoulder armor, legs, and feet are melded with dark blue and white. This, interestingly enough, still matches the water aesthetic, since it could pass as waves in the ocean, or frothing water, or clouds over a dark sky, or a whirlpool. Her secondary color is white, which could be due to her water powers being laced with electricity. Still, I feel like a transparent color could have been a better choice to convey the water motif. Transparent clear would have been my choice, since water itself is naturally clear, and it would have made a really interesting change compared to other water Toa in matching the aesthetic. As it is, I feel like the white is a little too abundant for a water character, but it's still alright, I guess. I think what is most surprising about Hahli is just how much gunmetal is in her set design. She got the chest armor as gunmetal, her weapon is gunmetal, even the barrel of her Zamor launcher is gunmetal, as opposed to her primary color like other Toa sets. I feel like it just kinda deters from the water aesthetic. I feel like silver would have definitely been a better choice. I know this could have been due to her inclusion in the Toa Jovan combiner model, but you could have given the gunmetal colors to Nuparu and just kept Hahli as silver and it would have worked just fine. For distinguishing pieces, she has the Type 2 torso armor, Hewkii legs for arms, and elliptical feet. Her weapon is a laser harpoon, which looks pretty cool. Surprisingly enough, the Paraka of Water also has this weapon type, but Hahli's is cooler since it lights up. It lights up green just like Jaller's, but I feel this doesn't deter too much, since green could possibly pass as seafloor or algae or something mixed in with water to make it look kind of green, and same as with her Zamorals. So green doesn't detract as much as it does with Jaller's set. Her mask is the Kanoe Elda, the Mask of Detection. Allows her to detect distant objects and is the best tool for finding the Mask of Life, since it gives her intense headaches when she's nearby the Mask of Life. Pretty decent, although I think the tubes underneath her eyes look pretty ugly. Still, Toa Hahli is a pretty decent water Toa, even with a bit of an odd color palette. Now we move on to Nuparu, the engineer, the creative inventor behind the Hewkii and the Boxor. Easily my favorite character of the Toa Inika. Set-wise though, he is a bit bland compared to the others. I know that monochromatic color schemes are the norm for Earth characters, but they could have thrown in some gunmetal to kinda spice things up. His torso armor is black, so his body looks pretty basic since it's just 3 black pieces fastened together with black pins. Just a very dull torso design. At least he has some pretty interesting set design choices, such as using light gray instead of dark gray. This could be due to the lightning powers. He also has some silver weaponry, except for his primary weapon, which is dark gray and not metallicized. It's just really weird that Nuparu breaks from the mold in this fashion with both his torso armor and his weapon. For piece distinctions, we have the Type 1 torso armor, Baki legs for arms, and elliptical feet. His primary weapon is the laser drill, which looks pretty sick, although it is pretty hard to light up with the claw in the way. Let me take it off real quick. I found this one is the hardest to activate. I don't know if I'm doing this wrong. I might have to take this apart again, but it glows red, which, while it isn't an earth color, it does match the scope or laser pointer at the top, so that's fairly intuitive for the design. Of course, he has his claws, which could be considered a homage to Toa Onua, or just an homage to his omnimatoran lifestyle of digging and tunneling. Of course, you often see Nuparu hold his drill with both his hands, and with the way that the claws are attached, you might be wondering how you incorporate a Zamor onto that. And thankfully, that's where we get to the coolest part of his set design. Screw that, I'm not going to pick that up. The shoulder-mounted Zamor launcher. It was a really interesting way of incorporating the Zamor launcher into the build, and has inspired future sets such as the Maxilos Robot, Puhatu Fantoka, Krika, and Malum. Of course, it's kind of a double-edged sword as it makes the top Zamor fall out a bit easier than usual. And I guess this technically adds another point of articulation too, since a ball joint is used to connect it to the back. Nuparu's Zamors are orange, which kinda matches the Earth aesthetic, and could be a tribute to his 2002 Matoran set. Nuparu's Kanohi is the Kanoi Kadin, the Mask of Flight. A paradoxical mask for an Earth Toa, but Nuparu does use this fairly effectively in the story. It's by far the best looking mask of the bunch, despite not looking so aerodynamic. Toa Nuparu, despite having a muted color scheme, still stands out in some unique ways compared to his fellow Toa, and even more compared to other Toa of Earth. Alright, Hewkii, the athlete, the all-star Coley champion, the guy whom I spent the entirety of last autumn trying to become. Call me biased, but I gotta say, he is my favorite Toa Inika set, and I'll explain why. After AVOC, the LEGO company stopped producing brown sets due to lack of sales. Why they didn't sell well, I don't know why. They had to find a replacement color scheme for stone characters, since it was an established pattern that all 6 elements would be included in a canister wave. They decided, let's go with amber as the replacement color. But amber isn't quite stony enough. So, with the abundance of metallic colors in the Toa Inika sets, they decided let's go with gunmetal as the primary color for the set, and oh my goodness, they really pulled it off. The combination of gunmetal and amber really looks like marbling stone, in my honest opinion. So it looks great as a stone motif. And also, it looks really balanced, this color scheme. Having the connector pieces, back and pelvis amber, and then having the mask, armor, limb pieces, and weaponry as gunmetal, it's just beautifully mixed. We got a great blend of dark and shiny and warm and bright, and it just really looks like a stone character despite not having the traditional brown and tan color scheme. Of course, there's also a bit of silver mixed in there as well, although I think the barrel of the launcher is a different silver than the silver used for the axe and chain, but I'm not going to focus on that too much. Of course, for piece distinctions, we have Type 1 torso armor, Hewkii legs for arms, and clawed feet. Hewkii's thigh armor is oriented upside down compared to the other Toa, although this detail is not included in any of his media depictions, which I find kind of weird. His primary weapon is the laser axe, which has a pretty long cutting edge compared to other axes carried by Toa, and it lights up red. I think the batteries might be low on this one because it's barely glowing there, but it's red. Doesn't really match the stone aesthetic, but it would have been a better choice compared to green or blue. He also has a little loop here which connects his climbing chain, his additional weapon, which can possibly interfere with posability, but you can always detach it from his shoulder so he can use it like he usually does. Thankfully, his Zamor launcher has orange Zamor spheres, which perfectly matches the rest of his color scheme. His Kanohi is the Kanohi Sanok, the Mask of Accuracy, fitting due to his scoring ability in Koli. Any object he throws can hit its target. And while it isn't the most aesthetically pleasing mask, its chiseled look does fit the stone motif and looks kind of cool. Finally, his head is actually attached one axle hole further back compared to the others, which is a nice subtlety to his set. In the end, Toa Hewkii was quite the risk. He ditched the traditional brown and tan color scheme we were so accustomed to with stone characters, but pulled off something incredible nonetheless with this color scheme. I'm also a big fan of his weaponry, and yeah, he's just my favorite Toa Inika set. It was a pleasure to finally dress up as this guy, even though I missed Halloween. Kongu, the aviator, an expert in gecko birds. Unfortunately, he is my least favorite of the Toa Inika team in terms of set design. Mainly due to the overabundance of dark green in his set. Yes, his weapons, shoulder armor, and thigh armor are silver, and he has chest armor and feet melded with silver, but it's mostly green. It just feels very bland for an air Toa. I really feel like they could have added another color in to spice things up. Even ignoring the lime, we could have gotten teal to pay tribute to his Matoran set, or just another shade of green, whether it was bright green or sand green, or even clear pieces to further capture the air aesthetic. As it stands though, he's just a lot of green. For piece distinctions, he uses the Type 1 torso armor. He's got Tometru legs for arms, elliptical feet. Kongu's shoulder armor is raised one axle hole higher than it is on the other Toa. His weapon is the laser crossbow, which is a pretty cool looking weapon, but I feel like they should have had the wings perpendicular to the axle to better depict a crossbow. At least you can turn it sideways. I guess that works. It lights up blue, and his Zamors are also blue, which I guess kinda deters from the color scheme, but could pass as an air color in a way. His mask is the Kanohi Suletu, the mask of telepathy. Allows him to read other minds, similar to Krana Za, used by the Borok. Unfortunately, it's probably the ugliest Kanohi of the bunch, since it's asymmetrical and doesn't have proper teeth. It just doesn't look nice. While Toa Kongu has a solid build, his color scheme is fairly humdrum compared to other Toa of Air and the rest of the Inika. At least he has some melding in his pieces, which is a fairly cool distinction, and he does stay faithful to the Toa of Air aesthetic. Finally, we have Matoro, the Paragon, the famed translator for Turaga, the one chosen by the Mask of Life to be its new guardian. Dare I say, Toa Matoro Inika is by far the best Ice Toa set. Even the Ice Glatorian struggle to compete. Up to this point, Ice character sets have been fairly monochromatic, with a little bit of light blue sprinkled in. It wouldn't be until Korak that we'd see blue incorporated into an Ice character set. And even then, its regular blue pieces were a bit too deep of a color for an Ice character, in my opinion. Thok would then use medium blue in his set, which was a solid improvement. However, Matoro blows both of them off the tip of the iceberg with his translucent blue pieces, perfectly embodying the ice aesthetic when mixed with the traditional white pieces. Add on the silver armor and weaponry, and you have probably the ideal Ice character color scheme. They even decide to make his back silver to make his torso more cohesive, but not completely homogeneous since his pelvis is still white. Literally the only problem is the lime eyes, but that's it. Everything else about this color scheme, brilliant. Of course, for piece distinctions, he has the Type 1 torso armor, Vaki legs for arms, clawed feet. His shoulder armor is attached one axle hole higher than it is on the others. His primary weapon is the energized ice sword, which is a nice homage to Toa Kopaka, and it lights up blue. Finally, a weapon that lights up in a color that matches the color scheme of the character. And the same can also be said for the Zamors, which are also medium blue. It just looks great. Except for maybe the mask. The mask is the Kanoi Aiden, the Mask of Spirit, allowing Matoro to dispel his spirit from his body and basically travel anywhere as a ghost form, although he leaves his body as an empty vessel. Yeah, it's kind of an ugly mask, but other than that and its eye color, I really don't have any problems with this set. It is easily the best Ice Toa character, probably the best Ice character in period, and is a very close runner-up to Hewkii as my favorite Toa Inika set. Here are all of the Toa Inika lined up from my favorite to least favorite. Regardless, they're all great sets in terms of a build stance. Their most unique traits are probably the light up weapons and the rubber kanohi. Their Zamor launchers are fun to play with, and most of them embody their respective elements excellently. If I had to recommend any of them, I would go with my top 3, Hewkii, Matoro, and Jaller, but you can't go wrong with any of them. Even Kongu has his redeeming qualities, and who knows, you might even like the abundance of green in his color scheme. This is all just my perspective, and I would love to hear your opinion on the Toa Inika in the comments. That's been my review of the Toa Inika. If you enjoyed this review, please like the video and leave a comment letting me know what Bionicle sets you would like me to review in the future. Subscribe for even more Bionicle content and BattleBots content if you're a fan of combat robotics. I've got BattleBots Season 7 reactions coming your way. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you later.